Those brilliant images of Liverpool, the side, out in Dubai, celebrating together as a team and just enjoying themselves, just being normal champions, which isn't in itself normal, exceptional individuals within an exceptional age of football, it made me feel a number of different ways. And I wonder if it made you feel very similar, or kind of if you guys can share some of these thoughts. Let me know how seeing those things made you feel. Off the top, I saw it alongside a tweet, which was someone saying, Liverpool need to win their last two games in order to equal Arsenal's, second place finish last season. And, that's really important to this side. Above Mo Salah and Dominic Szoboszlai leaving the hotel, linen shirts kind of draped across their shoulders, neither of them particularly looking like they care, but definitely beginning to celebrate. And this video is about that, and about those iconic images that we're now watching of Liverpool that are currently being created, and how this is going to be a little bit of a different video here, guys. So I kind of want you to stick around for this one, because I think I'm interested in this kind of thing, and I want to know if you're interested in this kind of framework. Over the last 2 or 3 years, the idea of the last dance for this Liverpool team has been a pretty heavy theme. At one point, it felt like there was a last dance for Mo Salah coming. At one point, it felt like there might be a moment where Virgil van Dijk would have to bow out. We never quite expected 2 or 3 years ago the drama that's happened with Trent since then, but maybe it's been in the mail and maybe we should have seen that coming. And then obviously we didn't ever see the Jurgen Klopp situation coming about last season. That felt very sudden, that felt very abrupt. And again, it felt like a last dance of sorts. And it takes me back to that documentary, The Last Dance. You might not have an interest in basketball. You don't need an interest in basketball to make this work. The themes from that are incredibly pertinent to this Liverpool side as I'm watching them celebrate. First of all, outside of a pandemic, which was something that this team haven't had before, but also just in this era, post 2 or 3 of their last dances, and whilst also in another last dance. A last dance that only some of them knew was happening. And that is why it feels appropriate to fit this Chicago Bulls framework. And by the way, I'm very aware of the fact that the dynastic Chicago Bulls, who won 6 championships in however many years, is very different to 2 championships or 2 Premier Leagues 5 years apart, with a dynasty of football that Liverpool themselves were trying to undermine. But winning in any era is good, and I think you can still learn something from those themes. So if you will stick around with me, I think those images that trigger this framework and thought pattern could be interesting. Let me know.
Okay, everybody.
It made me grateful, first of all, and I think that's the way that a lot of people feel. Come the end of a season, very often you're exhausted, you're relieved just to get there in the first place. You're a little bit confused, you're looking at the future, sport kind of back to backs. There are tournaments over the summer. There's a little bit of a break to be had, but you don't want to stop some of the good habits and patterns that you've gotten into, but also you have to in order to strengthen some of those habits and patterns that you need to be able to go in the long term. That's partly why the Chicago Bulls were so dynastic, why they were so brilliant. We saw behind the curtain, we saw some of the tape that was never meant to be seen, it'd been kept for such a long time under lock and key. And then people want to, at the end of the season, open their notebooks and kind of give us some of those thoughts. A lot of journalists see a lot of things, hear a lot of things that they just can't put out there into the media because it might lock them or freeze them out of what is going on. But there are valuable lessons sitting in each of these notebooks for so many different people, right? And not only for us as fans, but also for them as players. And I wanted to work out, and I think that, the end of The Last Dance is quite pertinent, right? It's about Michael Jordan's last year being at the very apex of sport, and how the institution of the Chicago Bulls didn't manage that particularly well. In fact, there's a lot of tension throughout about managing your own image with the institution's image, with the people who think they know best about the institution, and some of the pitfalls, challenges, traps, hazards, drawbacks, setbacks, snags, obstacles, downsides, complications, and shortcomings that come with that can feel and can have an impact on the way that your season is. But behind closed doors, things are very different. And I hope that you're seeing some of the comparisons and the themes in there. I know this isn't a tactical analysis, but an analysis of the actual difficulties this team has been through, whilst there are lots of Arsenal fans who want to undermine what Liverpool have been through, does give me that feeling of The Last Dance. And it was a very key documentary. It traces a lot of the same ideas that Liverpool had to contend with. First of all, yes, these are iconic images that Liverpool are creating. Arne Slot, Jurgen Klopp, all of these, Liverpool have already jumped some of these sharks, or at least feel like they're jumping some of these sharks, because a huge issue was Michael Jordan would leave if Phil Jackson didn't stick around. And that's a big one, right? Liverpool players were clearly left reeling after Jurgen Klopp announced his departure, and it impacted some more than others. You saw the emotion from Trent last season. Maybe you also saw that his plans were slightly changed or slightly diminished, or the feeling that he had for the club were changed because Jurgen announced that he was going to leave. The framework, the infrastructure, the morals, the fabric of the club was fundamentally going to change without Jurgen Klopp there. And the same goes for Phil Jackson and Michael Jordan. He said, I wouldn't play without Phil Jackson there again. And that leads me on to the kind of the first big thing, right? A lot of people can't understand the booing because from the outside, it feels pretty unnuanced, feels pretty simple. Trent has done a lot for this club and he's achieved a lot, right? And in sport, that kind of is a constant thing. At 1 minute, you're at the very top. The next minute, you can be crashing down. Your relationship, if you don't express it very visibly or very effectively, can very quickly be diminished by small hiccups. And I think, Trent, there isn't really one figure for Liverpool who is the Michael Jordan of the team. You could argue that is Mo Salah. You could argue that's Virgil van Dijk. You could argue that's Alisson. Arguably, Mo Salah and Virgil van Dijk are the closest, but Mo Salah's not really that. Maybe he is kind of like a Jordan tension type character, but Virgil van Dijk also has some of that brooding nature. Trent is a bit more of a peripheral figure or kind of like a sidekick to some of those guys because of his assists and those guys. That's how he's painted. But that makes him more of a Scottie Pippen, still someone who's very important. Pippen was like the immediate brilliant player to Jordan. He's kind of Jordan's right-hand guy, if you like, but that almost diminishes what his role is, similar to Trent Alexander-Arnold. But there was this tension throughout the documentary and obviously throughout this season about whether people would leave. And I think what you saw in the documentary was that behind the scenes, and similar to Liverpool, people knew a lot more than was out in the public anyway, and they didn't want to put that out there before the end of the season, before they achieved their goal. This is about self-sacrifice for one goal, either the Champions League, the Premier League, or both, right? And Liverpool have done that, made that sacrifice. Trent has made that sacrifice this season, possibly to the detriment of his own body, possibly to the detriment of his own mental health, all those kind of things, which again is why it's confusing for people when they hear us booing him. But at the same time, the difference between Liverpool and the Chicago Bulls was the Chicago Bulls have obviously got less people on their roster because you can only have 5 people who are kind of the true starting 5 for any team in one season, right? Maybe you can have 6 or 7, but you know what I'm saying. Liverpool have got a bit more of there's double the amount of people who start, first of all. But what I mean by that is the relationship that the fans have with those people is incredibly important then, and it is magnified. It brings you incredible fame. It means you have to back those people, whether you know about their true intentions or not. We backed those guys. And it becomes very intense. It becomes a very intense level of bonding that you have with those people. Now, whether that bonding is real or not is a whole other thing. Michael Jordan was clearly very dedicated to the Chicago Bulls because of what the Chicago Bulls represented. And maybe this sheds a little bit of light on why Trent is leaving is because the institution fundamentally will be changing without Jurgen Klopp, a father figure of sorts to Trent Alexander-Arnold and to a number of players within those teams. But some of those players want to prove themselves at Liverpool and in the Premier League, and they don't see that somewhere else in the Premier League. They see Liverpool as primed for that. Virgil van Dijk, Mo Salah, whoever else you want to put in that list, possibly even Alisson. But at one point, Michael Jordan demanded a trade away from the Chicago Bulls. At one point, he didn't want to be there anymore because they weren't representing the same things. And he felt that his career was best spent elsewhere. At one point, he wanted to play baseball, for goodness sake. So there is an equivalency there between great players wanting to forge their own path, wanting to write their own story and not have it told to them by someone else. That's, for me, where the boos felt almost a little bit uncharitable on the weekend, was not because people shouldn't be able to express themselves. They always should be able to express themselves. But because we saw that there was a lack of connection between Trent and the team and the fans. And that felt so harsh to be calling that out in that moment. It almost felt uncomfortable. And you could see the main people that reacted to that were people who appear to not feel comfortable with that feeling of calling out something that doesn't feel right. Broadly, there are, a lot of the people who wrote about this on Twitter, on social media, on those kind of things. And, I hope you guys understand what I mean here. It's not so high-minded, but I'm just kind of trying to express it. Were people who understand the institution of the Premier League, understand the capitalist idea of building something and everything being just so that we can all just enjoy the product and we'll all benefit and we'll all take a little bit of cash out, and that's what Trent's doing because Trent's exploiting the system to get more money for himself, and the billionaires of Liverpool should understand that, so therefore the fans should as well because they all benefit, so we're all winning. It's kind of like, shh, and let the system do its thing. Well, guess what? Liverpool are skeptical of the system because there have been times in the past that Liverpool have been completely screwed by the way that the system works. And I'm sure we've all got moments we can relate to this. Thatcher and her government, there were notes from meetings that said, let it die, about Liverpool. It still gives me goosebumps now, thinking about when I didn't grow up in Liverpool for long, but when I was in Liverpool in the early 90s, I remember observing, and I kind of want to find the best way to say this, but observing some of the abject poverty that people within the city were living in. I didn't live in that when I was a kid. I lived in a small leafy town where life was relatively soft and forgiving. And when I go to Liverpool, my interactions, I wasn't the same as those other kids. I wasn't a Scally, I wasn't a Scouser, I wasn't growing up with parents who were struggling to make it paycheck to paycheck or struggling to make ends meet or whatever you want to call it. And Liverpool understands that. That isn't something that goes away just because you have kids and those kids don't know those same things. Broadly then, there's been an injection of money into Liverpool since then. But those things pass on from generation to generation. And the understanding of what your grandfather went through and your forefathers stays within teams, which is why Anfield is still so important, which is why Liverpool is still so important, which is why people can diminish the marketing and this means more and all those kind of things, but is why people have these expectations. And if you don't grow up in that, you will not understand that level of nuance. Even if you're a Liverpool fan, but you grow up in another country, you will not understand that level of detail that happens there. I didn't understand that, and I was born in Liverpool. I spent the first few years of my life in Liverpool. Now, I'm not saying everyone lived in poverty. What I am saying is you will not understand the bond between a team like that in Liverpool and what that team meant from before Shankly, but from very much from Shankly onwards, before Shankly, for sure, but Shankly onwards, and what that gave to Liverpool as a city alongside the Beatles and fashion, all these other things, right? How that gives a sense of pride that I can't share in the same way, but I still feel in a different way, almost by proxy to my own dad or the people around me. Now that feels very personal, first of all, so I feel a little bit uncomfortable sharing it because I know some people in the comments are going to try and come for that. But I hope you get what I'm saying there. And that's why they feel so let down, so invested in this project. And why it's probably so hard to then say, well, the owners and Liverpool fans have the same interest. Yeah, the interest is the success on the field. But what goes in between us is not it's not all about, we don't understand money in the same way as Trent will understand money, or Trent's brother who manages him will understand money. Those people have had access to things that we probably can only dream of in a majority of our lives, right? And so the tension between the owners and the players is something that we could maybe understand on a micro level in our own jobs when we want to get a promotion or whatever. But actually, there's a different kind of tension there. It's, are you going to be successful for the next 5 or 6 seasons? Why are you dismantling something which has been successful for this long? Is it because I don't fit into this project anymore? Again, the Chicago Bulls were looking to dismantle what was a very successful system almost willy-nilly because they wanted to impose their own identity on it. And that felt, in the documentary, very tense. Now, again, I'm not saying that, there's that kind of tension. I feel there maybe is that level of tension at times. I don't think Liverpool players don't like Michael Edwards or Richard Hughes or any of those kind of people. I just think they feel an ending to the Klopp era here. And so watching them celebrate is good. Watching them have this level of fame and watching them have this level of success, we love that as fans. I love to see that. I love to kind of even just share in that kind of in a voyeuristic style way. But it ups the expectation for next season, because the idea is we're about to start again on another climb to the summit. And being at that summit and watching them have that rest, watching them have that moment is incredibly important. But there was bonding through adversity for some of these guys. You could see throughout the season that Trent was different, I think, Salah and Virgil. But Salah and Virgil were kind of both negotiating for their contracts and almost helping the other one negotiating for his contract. But now I think what we're going to learn in the next few years, months, whatever, after Trent's left and after he's had his first interview and his say and the pain that he felt around leaving the club and the moment when we booed him. And I saw there was a comment below from one of my videos which said, you know, Trent is leaving, but this was also at the same time that he had his first opportunity to win a title, to celebrate that with the fans in that moment. You can be successful, but you can have that kind of taken away if you don't get to share in the spoils of all of that and everything you've seen, the almost cliched now idea of the bus top tour and all those kind of things. Those kind of things are really important, especially to players. They want those iconic moments. Those are not only great marketing moments, those are great personal moments. Trent won't share in that because he's already distanced himself from the team. He's already distanced himself from the fans. And then you realise that there are other players in the squad who are going to be looking at Trent and saying, I have to play with you now, an incredibly talented, brilliant player, similar to the Last Dance, where I know you're good, and I know you're probably one of the best right backs, and I know you're going to unlock Salah, or unlock Nunez, or unlock Jota, or unlock whoever's out on that left wing, or Diaz, or Gakpo, whoever. But at the same time, I know you're not in it for the long haul. And I feel that tension. Everyone's picked up on those social media clips where you see looks between players, or the way they all greet each other, or all those kind of things. You could even see it on the weekend when Virgil was asked about it. It was like, he wasn't cold about it. They all understand it as professionals, and they all want their friend to do well. But they also realise, if I'm to do well, we all have to be putting the same amount of effort in. And you could see the frustration towards Trent at times during the season. Maybe we're projecting some of that, and it didn't go as deep as maybe we are reading. But I still think that there is a level of tension there that the professionals see they have to sacrifice elements of their own idea of what professionalism is in order for others to do well. That's the Dennis Rodman element of the team. Some of you might know Dennis Rodman. He was an incredibly controversial basketball player. He wasn't necessarily controversial in modern terms. I think he's probably just seen as a bit of a maverick, a guy who rides roughshod over the rules. But he was also someone who would go and party in Vegas, come back and then perform particularly well because he needed that release from football. And again, maybe you can understand that with Trent. Like, you see these guys getting this release at the end of the season in this big moment of a build-up. But you can also understand maybe that they all don't always want to be a part of that. And sometimes they want to step out of that and explore their own ideas and those kind of things. And Dennis Rodman's self-expression is something that was encouraged in the documentary. So why would we not encourage that with a young scouser like Trent, who has done very well for the team? Again, you can have both of those feelings. That tension was explored in this documentary. And if we had the camera in there, what would we be seeing? How would we be seeing? I think we'd be seeing a man who's very split between loving something and wanting to do the best for what he considers to be his own future. And that changes the framing of where Trent is at. The booing, of course, is heartbreaking, but it's heartbreaking not only because Trent is heartbroken, but because those other people feel let down. Those feelings exist in order to boo. But also because then there are a bunch of people from the outside picking over it and looking at it and making it feel bigger than it actually is. That level of fame the Chicago Bulls had, the level of focus and like the ire of everyone on them because they were so good, because they had a bit of a cross on their back, because people wanted to make sure they didn't succeed in what they had. All those things were big. And that feels the same for Liverpool. There's a lot of people who are sniping, a lot of people are trying to undermine, whilst also being hyper-focused on one goal. Now, on top of that, of course, there is also other people's expectations and level of dominance. Liverpool now need to have this level of dominance moving forward. And I think when you put the themes and the structure onto this Liverpool side, there are a couple of interesting conclusions you come to. First of all, legacy and identity. Virgil van Dijk has very much cemented himself. I think he already was in most Liverpool fans' minds, but he's now cemented himself, I think, as the greatest Premier League centre-back of all time. Mo Salah similarly cementing himself as, if not the greatest right winger of all time in the Premier League, one of the greatest Premier League players of all time. Doing that in incredible public pressure and perception is really important. But very often the perception isn't the same as the reality in football, and the stories that are told don't match up to what's happening behind the scenes. And again, you've got to wait for the end of the season for that notebook to empty. Team dynamics and brotherhood. Brotherhood's an interesting one with this, because I think a lot of people are seeing the business and power element of it, the power that Trent holds, the power that the business holds, the power Real Madrid holds, but they're not seeing the kind of bonding and the team dynamics between the players. How is that impacted by Trent wanting to leave, or Virgil negotiating with someone else, or Salah putting things out in the media? They all understand that? Do they all have these chats in their house? Like, do they resent some of those elements? Will we not find out for 20 years? Obsession. The Liverpool fans are obsessed, and so are the players, and those things all matched up. And then leadership and greatness. Leadership from Arne Slot. Greatness from this Liverpool side that have been built, habits have been instilled, and broadly, I think Liverpool's structure as an institution has supported those things. So moving forward, the Liverpool players feel much more comfortable signing on to the future. Those Virgil comments over the last week about, hey, we're about to have a really big summer here. We're about to do something really special. That's really important, I think, for Liverpool fans to hear. That's really important for Liverpool fans to get invested in. These small habits that we work up every week about, well, what are the ownership really doing? Where's the money? All these kind of things. Those are important to hold people to account. But broadly, if there's success coming in and it is working and we are having a good time whilst doing it, sure, we can pick over some of the details, but to constantly be questioning that, I think is a little bit disingenuous, frankly. And finally, I think when we're looking towards the future, how to avoid some of those pitfalls, right? Because the Chicago Bulls fell off after this season, essentially. You know, Scottie Pippen went elsewhere, Jordan sort of retires, Phil Jackson goes elsewhere and obviously has great success with whoever else. With the Lakers. You can't say the Lakers if you're a Spurs fan, I'm a Spurs fan. Anyway, within that, right, what we're now seeing is the Liverpool players themselves are also moving on from Trent. There was apparently a conversation, as according to Indy Kalir, and there are a couple of other journalists as well, between Virgil van Dijk and Jeremy Frimpong. Imagine Van Dijk's situation. He knows he needs to be that leader. He knows he needs to embody the leadership that is there at Liverpool, right? But he also has a friend in Trent. Someone who maybe feels a bit let down by, maybe someone he feels a little bit undermined by, maybe feels like, well, now we don't have the same goals. You know, what's our relationship? We can still be friends. You know, I've had that where other people within teams that I've been in have kind of surprised me in wanting to do different things or whatever. And maybe that changes the nature of our relationship. But it didn't change my goal to want to be great or prolific or whatever the things are. I know you guys are going to laugh. Obviously, everyone wants to be great and prolific. I think it's very reasonable to want to have a great life. I know I haven't lived up to a lot of those expectations in recent years, and I know I let a lot of people down at different points, or a lot of people feel let down, but those are very par for the course, should we say. That's excluding all the jackmate stuff that went on. But that's my point. It's like, he now has to plan for the future because Trent has decided not to be part of that. So while we're busy talking about Liverpool fans booing, and we're busy talking about will Liverpool be this greatest side of all time, Arsenal fans trying to pick at us, journalists trying to pick at us, people trying to mar that relationship, I actually think the reality is behind the scenes, Virgil and those guys are already moving on. There are people in my comments yesterday saying, move on from the Trent situation. Okay, like, we've got to discuss it. Let's, some people need to process these things, understand the narrative, understand the history of what is happening, or try to write that history in the moment in order to work out what our trajectory is, where it is that we're going to go next, and to frame the new signings. Are we respectful of Trent? How do we frame it? Will we frame it one way for a year, and then in 2 or 3 years we'll probably feel different about Trent if Jeremy Frimpong isn't great, or if Conor Bradley's injured, or whatever it is. We might miss Trent next season. We might miss that creativity. But without Trent in the side, and because he's one of one, we are going to have to change this side fundamentally. And that's the other big thing. There were fundamental changes that were going to happen at the Bulls, which I think were necessary at that time. But in order for those to go well, and one kind of shark we've already jumped, if you want to put it that way, is bringing in another manager and bringing in another leadership structure within the team, Slot and his guys. And a lot of players have commented about that themselves, the freshening up of that, the difficulty of letting go of the old Liverpool players who weren't quite able to play, A, the new tactical style that Liverpool wanted to play, but B, be the leaders that they needed to be, because maybe some of their methods have been worn out. Jordan Henderson, James Milner, Fabinho, whoever else in the side. Jurgen Klopp himself maybe was talking about feeling a little bit tired, not quite being able to reach those levels and wanting to move away before it got to such a low that it felt irredeemable almost and damages his legacy. Maybe that's another element for Trent. I don't want to damage my legacy at Liverpool. He kind of has already, but through maybe not doing this in the right way. But you see what I'm saying here? More of those themes that come out of the overall themes of The Last Dance. But The Last Dance, the reason it's called The Last Dance, because there is that ending. And that can very often feel painful, acrimonious. There can be a grieving process around that. I think as fans, Liverpool are very good at grieving. We've had a lot of, that's not a joke, by the way, it's not even me being frivolous about it. There's a lot of grieving that has gone on in this fan base. We've become very sensitive to each other in a good way, very understanding to each other in a good way. And sometimes that can be hard to understand online, and sometimes that can be hard to express online because vulnerability is very often picked on rather than celebrated online. And that's, I imagine, why the footage that Michael Jordan sat on and the NBA sat on and everyone else sat on for 20 years was partially sat on. It was because there was such vulnerability in it. And transition is a vulnerable time for everyone, right? Because the human condition dictates that, of course, you want things to feel as sure as possible. Or broadly, a majority of people want things to feel as sure as possible because they don't deal well with adversity or change or any of those kind of things. Because, at the very top level, actually 1% of change can make a massive difference. And, you can win on those increments. Maybe I've gone on a little too long here. I'd be interested to know what you guys think. I just think it's worth... I feel like we've come to some meaningful conclusions in this video, but I also want to hear what your meaningful conclusions are when you take that 10-part documentary series that they shot and sat on and then edited and got people to go back and reflect on years later, which then brought up a whole bunch more feelings about the resentment towards Jordan. Again, themes there within the team, the bonding with other players, the way that players were beasted within there, the culture that was created. Was that good for everyone? Was that good for just a couple of people? All these kind of different themes. Some of the sacrifices you make, the sacrifices aren't necessarily, get up early or whatever. Those feel very normal, part of the course of footballers. But the sacrifice you make of your own ego, the sacrifice you make for your own goals. Is Dominic Szoboszlai playing the 10 he wants to play in or the 8 he wants to play in? Or is he playing a role in order to win a Premier League title? The same for McAllister. He was sacrificing himself at the start of the season. He's very much grown into the role. At one point last season, Gravenberch was sacrificing his own brilliance. And now we've seen he's been maximised going somewhere else. Konate sacrifices some of his own game. This is part of being a team, by the way, so it's not exceptional, but it is interesting to observe. Trent sacrifices some of his own game. He wants to probably be more attacking. Salah sacrifices some of his game. He has Nunez alongside him and has to be a support structure there. Luis Diaz sacrificed in order to go through the middle when I'd imagine he wanted to be out on the wing. Cody Gakpo sacrificed and sitting on the bench. Andy Robertson sacrificed in not starting every game because of his own body, the sacrifice he made over years. Jurgen Klopp sacrificed his own career in order for the best to come out, all these kind of things. And I want to finish by going through what some of these episodes are called on The Last Dance, right? Because I think each of them can kind of be applied to overall sporting structure, but specifically to Liverpool. Episode 1 was called Climb. It was about, for me, that was about the years when Jordan was growing up, and this was about the years when Klopp was laying that foundation for those guys. Robin was episode 2. That's about Scottie Pippen, who was the side show to a lot of people to Michael Jordan. Again, incredibly interesting, incredibly kind of insightful to see someone like him being so, self-sacrificing, should we say. The greatest. It centers around Dennis Rodman on this one, his unique personality and kind of his crucial contribution. I think that's where these peripheral figures at Liverpool have been brought in. They're not piano carriers. I think that's what the midfield was before. And there's, the Hendos, the Wijnaldums, the Fabinhos, those guys felt like kind of an accoutrement to the front line, right? The moment of truth was episode 4. It's about building the machine and then finding out if it actually works. And I think that's what Liverpool have done this year. And, to an extent, like you can compare them with Arsenal and Arsenal can say, it's all about timing and those kind of things. It's kind of the point. Like, it's not just about build in one season and then win the next. Liverpool have been building this structure for years now and have been investing in this structure for years now. And it paid off this season. It won't always pay off because structures don't last forever. They get undermined, other people build other structures, all those kind of things. But that's kind of the point, is like the moment of truth was this season for Liverpool and for Arsenal. And the truth was Liverpool made it and Arsenal didn't. And Arsenal then have to go away, assess their truth, and come back. Fair enough. Next, episode 5 was the hero's journey. Now, you could apply this to any of those players. And, it depends how long you want to look at the timeline. Mo Salah's journey this season, very much at the peak. He's had an all-time Premier League season, not just in terms of him, but in terms of all players, right? Virgil van Dijk. Adversity this season, the chance to be a captain, to come to the fore, to be the leader, the structure that Liverpool build around, the captain. Trent, the hero's journey. This is a dip for him. This is that moment, that dark moment that you have to go through in order to build out the other side. And I'm sure that his sports psychologist and everyone around him will also be saying that. And then obviously other people in there building their own ideas and legacies, different people building up different things. Andy Robertson, possibly having been the hero, is now dealing with the idea of, kind of Batman style. You live long enough to see yourself age or become the villain. He's not a villain, but you get my point. And maybe there's elements of sacrifice in that. All In was episode 6. Talks about the media pressure, the gambling controversy for them, the beginning of Jordan's personal and public scrutiny. Liverpool have been through that public scrutiny. They've been through some controversy, possibly under Klopp, possibly with Trent, Salah, all these guys. I think that bonded the team this season. I thought that brought them closer. You Push People explores Jordan's leadership style, his father's death, and his first retirement from basketball. This is about how you push the team, and Slott's learned to push the team in a very kind of healthy way this season. And I think broadly what you can do is compare the management styles of Klopp and Slot and say they're different personalities with not similar outcomes, but similar footballing outcomes. Klopp, incredibly successful guy, built a great side, and Slot understood that. He was perceptive enough to come in and harness some of that energy, see there were some comparisons, and think waves he could ride that had been essentially swept by Klopp, and he did that really, really well. But now it's time for him to build his own thing and time to push people in a different way. And, a season of that kind of motivation, let's see what happens in season 2 when we're a little bit further away from the wave of Klopp and we've ridden that. Number 8, the comeback. It's Jordan's return to the NBA, the challenges he faced, and the road back to the championship form. The greatest comparison for me would be Virgil van Dijk. Virgil van Dijk was injured by Jordan Pickford against Everton. I think a lot of people said he'll never play his best football again. Look at the comeback. Look at the rise of Virgil van Dijk again. And I think you're probably looking at another reason as to why his legacy and why he is the greatest Premier League centre-back of all time. Whether he's the most decorated or not is another thing. But maybe by the time he finishes his career, he has some comparable numbers there to look at, and why I think broadly people feel good about him moving forward. The Last Stand, it highlights the Bulls' battles in the 97-98 playoffs, and especially with the Indiana Pacers and the Utah Jazz. Those were two of the big, should we say, institutes at that time that were challenging the Bulls, and they had to go through them. The Bulls had kind of ran through other people. Manchester United, similar in the Premier League, the Detroit Pistons were at a bit of a low after that. Similar to the Celtics, all those other teams. The Knicks were kind of Arsenal in this sense. I'd love to know what you guys think about that. If you're an NBA fan and everything else, you'd be interested to know. Then they had to go through and face the Pacers, a team who were kind of built to beat them. Same with the Utah Jazz. Great players on that team, but kind of what were they going to do? How would they beat those guys? And actually, in the end, they dispatched them pretty handily, which Liverpool's kind of done this season, apart from with teams like PSG and maybe Newcastle, but I don't really think that that's the same kind of comparison to the Bulls. The point is more about, this will have felt like a bit of a last stand to some of these players. It will have felt like a build-up of tension and a kind of an apex of where they were in their career. What are we going to do for Trent before he leaves? What if Salah does intend on going? I don't think the players ever thought he would go, but you get my point. And then the final one, legacy. brings the story full circle and focuses on the final moments of the 98 championship run and the end of an era. Liverpool's era of Klopp is closed with this bus tour. We never had that bus tour under Klopp, and I think that's always kind of hung over the team spectre-like. We got a bus tour with those 2 cups, but because we had the edge taken off the season by not winning the quad or not winning all those things, I think this feels like a continuation of that. So I think that's the 10 episodes. How would you structure that if you were to write the last dance for this Liverpool side? Maybe I'll do that in another video. I'd be interested to know if you guys would be interested in watching or talking about that or doing that on a live stream or something like that. Have you guys enjoyed this video? I think there are a lot of parallels between the last dance and this. And I hope that you can kind of take your own structure and put it on this Liverpool team and maybe understand a little bit more and a little bit deeper without me telling you. I'm not saying, oh, go away and do your own homework, but I'm saying like, that's my hope here, is it's not about just, hey, I came to the video, I got this, and then I went. I just hope you guys get that element that I want to try to make between us as a team and see what we can get from it, okay? Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I'd appreciate, some comments. Let me know, is there any constructive feedback? Get into the Discord, express that there. Get into the Patreon, definitely express that there. And let me know what you guys think. I'll chat to you guys in a little while on this channel, and I'll be doing more videos like this because I enjoy doing them. I will see you later. Much love.